Welcome to the Prison Pod. This series, Leaving the Emotional Cage with Rob Corbin, consists of 7 episodes. For the best experience, please start with episode 1. Rob Corbin is a former inmate in the 1980s. He experienced living in 2 prisons at the same time, and he will talk in detail about what that means. Rob has 46 years of experience living with hate, anger, resentment, bitterness, and rage towards his own father. He will talk about his journey and what changed his life, letting it all go within minutes. He is an ebook author on the subject of forgiveness, grief, and trauma, and is a credentialed support group facilitator. For the past 8 years, he has been working with prisons in Oregon, Arizona, and California as an unpaid volunteer, teaching a step-by-step process to come to a moment in one's life where they can let go of the toxic emotional past. We are thankful to Rob for sharing this series with our listeners.
Welcome to the Prison Pod, a podcast for all people experiencing incarceration. The mission of this podcast is to save lives, restore hope, reduce suffering, and recidivism. Many show ideas come directly from the listeners, so please write the host. Prison Pod, Post Office Box 294, Orono, Maine, 04473. Here is your host, Ms. Valerie.
Well, hello. Thank you for letting us join you again on the Prison Pod. Rob Corbin is back, and we're going to do our second installment of Leaving the Emotional Cage. And I'm not quite sure, so I'm going to ask Rob, where did we leave off?
Well, first of all, good morning to you, Valerie. And for all the listeners out there, I don't know what time of the day the listeners crank up, but man, I am so grateful for the person who ever invented coffee. I'll tell you something. You know, it's about the first thing that I think about when I wake up in the morning, and then the second thing is using the restroom. But the coffee comes first, man. I got to get that pot cooking, and I'm glad to have some Java in my left hand as we speak, and so I'm doing great. It's really nice to be connected with you again, and to be connected to all the people out there who are listening. So, you know, one of the things that we talked about that I want to embellish on is, you know, these emotional wounds that happen for a lot of the inmates when I do a class started at the age of, you know, very young and tender age, 5, 6, 7, 8 years of age. You know, they're being told by their father or whoever's responsible for raising them a lot of negative trash talk that demeans them, that makes them feel really small, that is a breeding ground, if you will, for shame and remorse and regret, because we're never good enough in the eyes of a child listening to a father. And some fathers were taught the wrong way by their fathers, how to be loving and tender and nurturing, and they were always taught under this, you know, this other truth that they embrace, which is really not the deepest truth, and that is that men are strong. And if we have wounds, we're supposed to keep them to ourselves, and, you know, don't show our weakness. And weakness was always defined, I shouldn't say always, but for many of us as a little child, as showing our true emotions. And so the end result is that we hold on to a lot of negative self-talk that we bought into as a child. And one of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about this morning, Valerie, is that to become emotionally free, we have to rewind the negative self-talk and start fresh with who we are today. Nothing that happens to us as a child, unfairly or unjustly, is our fault. You know, when when a parent teaches a child something that demands of that child something that is unrealistic, such as be a man when they're a boy. They're not, you can't be a man at the age of 6 or 7 or 8 years old. We don't meet expectations. Here we've got a father or a mother or both that are teaching us to be strong and don't show our emotions. And so we were never given permission to be authentic in our feelings. And a lot of inmates and people on the outside are wounded because of that, because of their childhood. And so one of the important things to really teach in my class is that anything that happens to us as a child, we're powerless to prevent. And the only truth that we know as a child is what we hear. We have no choice but to trust those who raised us as a young parent, whether it's good or bad. And a lot of times we end up really being emotionally harmed because of that. And so, we have to now as an adult understand that we are not responsible for what happens to us as a child. Our parents are responsible, not us. So the guilt and the shame from the past has to leave us, because we don't deserve as adults to be holding on to childhood wounds. So I think that's kind of important this morning, to talk a little bit about.
Yeah, and as you know, we don't learn in school how to take care of that stuff. When we're carrying around the emotional baggage, we're taught, how to read and how to write, but we're not taught those navigation skills of communication very well, especially when we were growing up.
Yeah.
I mean, everything was business in school. There wasn't very much social at all, unless we were on the playground. So,
Right.
and when we hear that, we can also project that negative self-talk, even when someone's trying to help us, especially in school. If a teacher says, well, if you try to do it this way, you don't see it that way. It's, oh, I did it wrong. And I think that's something that we tend to carry with us from childhood. If we have that negative talk from our parents, then it becomes negative self-talk as adults.
Right. Right. And it's I guess I could use the word ironic that, people that are in prison because they broke the law, and if it involved hurting another person, which we refer to as the victim, inmates and most men out there, inside or outside of prison, it's really the same, are also victims growing up. They're also victims. They're victims of neglect. They're victims of parents teaching them, the wrong things in life to be authentic as a human being. And Valerie, I got to tell you, there's a lot of physical abuse, emotional abuse, and sexual abuse that a lot of people, when I'm doing a class behind the wall, come clean on. They talk about it. They said, yeah, you know what? My uncle sexually abused me, or my dad, or my brother. Physical abuse is, pretty darn common, I got to tell you. So when we talk about victims, I go in with the approach that we're all victims in one way or another. And so, all we know is what we know when we're a young person. All we don't have a choice but to listen to those responsible for raising us. And like you said, they don't teach that stuff in school. So, the whole idea that I want to convey, in this moment is that the past doesn't define who we are. It's what we do about the past. And so, when people talk about all the terrible stuff that happened to them, and then they became sucked into a system of gang life, or, whatever they got into that led them to incarceration. What I ask them is, who are you now versus who were you, 10 years ago or 15 years ago when you got busted, or 20 years ago? Are you a different person today? And how you're going to be remembered uh, in terms of your life is not based on the past. It's what you decide to do about it. And so that's where emotional freedom, comes in, because you can be free anywhere you want to be free, emotionally speaking. No one can take that precious gift away from you.
And I'm assuming that you have some steps or guidelines on how people can go about that, because we are talking about forgiveness. And that's one of those things that if we don't learn those skills young, it's hard to know what forgiveness is sometimes. People don't even understand it. And they think that we need to forgive somebody else and that the forgiveness is for them, to release them. But as we learn, as we grow, forgiveness is a lot more about us. We need it personally.
The thing is, you're exactly right. And if we choose to hold on to negative stuff, especially when it comes to other people messing us up emotionally, when we pin our feelings on another person, we are openly accepting the victim role. And when we accept the victim role, we're the ones that suffer, not the perpetrator. The ones that hurt us are not the ones that are, living with our emotions. The only one that's living with our emotions is us. And as I mentioned, in our first podcast that we did recently, that you can hold others responsible for just about anything, but you can't hold them responsible for your feelings, because they don't control your feelings. They don't have the ability to control your feelings. It's only us. It's on us. And so when you forgive another person, you're not letting them off the hook. You're not validating that what they did or they said is justified. You're letting yourself off the hook. You're letting yourself off the hook, being in the victim role and becoming emotionally free from that. So a lot of people think that, that if they forgive, that they're giving in or accepting what happened. You're not accepting what happened. All you're doing is you're saying, you know what, I deserve to be emotionally free from that past stuff. And I'm giving myself permission to no longer be hurt by the past. It's a decision. And Valerie, we're used to making decisions every day. Some decisions are a little, excuse me, tougher than others, but we're used to making decisions every day. We have the power to make decisions that we want to make in our life, especially when it comes to our feelings as a person. And, the prison system has no relationship to our emotional well-being. They can physically confine us, but they can't emotionally confine us. It's all on us. It's all on us.
When somebody is starting this journey, and I always look at it that way, that when we're moving ahead in life, we're on a journey. We're trying to get from point A to point B to point C, and hopefully, when we get to the end, it's a pleasant place. Um, but a lot of us don't know how to navigate those emotions, and we have that negative voice in there that says, I can't let go. What do you do and what do you offer to people who have that feeling? How do you, and I don't like to use the word convince, but you kind of have to convince people that yes, you do have the power within to make those changes.
Yeah, it's a good question that you're bringing up. First of all, if we go back in time and talk about the biggest universal laws out there in the universe that we don't have any control over, one of which is that forgiving is a decision, and that we have the ability to make decisions in our lives. Um, you talked about the process and the journey, and there really is a journey and a process to it. Um, in my class, for example, one of the ways that we come to a place where we have the ability to make a decision to forgive is to take a step back and to take full ownership of the feelings that as men that we have often learned as a young child um, to hold back, to regress, to not show these feelings. We either deny or regress on these feelings, and we don't bring them to the surface. And so, one of the processes in the class is to write what's called a truth letter. It's a 5-page questionnaire that talks about the past and how they were affected by the past. And, what were their deepest needs, for example, as a child growing up that they needed that they never got? If they were going to forgive, who would it be? Who would be the first 2 people on the list that they would forgive? What happened? What were the consequences of those actions? And so it's called taking a step back before you can move forward. And so this truth letter that is part of my class gives people the ability to step back and fully embrace the emotional wounds, to take ownership of the emotional wounds so that they can leave them. You have to take a step back to move forward. It's sort of like if you're going to run a race, you have to take a step back from the starting line in order to get the momentum to go full speed when the race begins. And so this is taking that step back to take ownership of that part of us that we deny or we regress or repress, that we don't bring to the surface. That's step number one. And then, in the class, we have the ability to fully take ownership of that by reading that letter in front of all of the people present in that class, to say, hey man, this is me, this is what happened. I want to share with you my pain. And a lot of times I see in the room other people listening, and their heads are nodding, like, you know what, this is me. I'm listening to me. Listening to this other guy is a reflection of myself, because I've been through the same crap that this guy has. You've got to take ownership of it. That's the first step before you can come to this point where you can let go. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's part of the class. And then the other thing, Valerie, is that when the time comes where you decide to forgive, if you do make that decision, a lot of we are experts at self-sabotage, and I want to kind of explain that to you for a minute. If we make a decision to do something, and the only person that's aware of what we're doing is us, no one else, and we say, you know what, I'm going to forgive my dad. And so we decide to forgive our dad. We wake up the next morning and we're saying, hey, did I really mean that? Did I really make that commitment? I don't think I did. I don't feel any different. I don't feel any different. So maybe I failed at making a decision. When it's just about us, okay, and there's no one else that is accountable for our decision, what happens is we lie to ourselves. We self-sabotage ourselves. There's no one to hold us accountable for our decision. In my class, it's a little different. And the difference is that people choose other people to hold them accountable. So that if they make a decision to forgive, they're not only making a decision to forgive, but they're making a decision that if they feel doubt as to what decision they made, that they are committed to go to the people that they choose in that class as support, what I refer to as support and accountability, to go to them and say, hey, Steve and Mike, when I was in Rob's class yesterday, I made this commitment to forgive my father, but you know what? I'm having doubts. I don't feel any different. Help me to honor my commitment to forgive, and let those men remind that person of the commitment that they made, so that the ramifications of self-sabotage doesn't crop up and appear again. We have to have other people hold us accountable. So the accountability piece is a big portion of forgiving. And really, when you're going to make commitments in your life, choose to have other people hold you accountable, because the consequence isn't just about you, it's about you and the other people who you made that commitment to. And that's real support. That's really relying on people who you trust emotionally for support. So, you have to have others hold you accountable if you really want to be successful, because then you can't just back out. It's not that easy to just back out. You've got other people that you're committed to going to, that are committed to holding you accountable for whatever that decision is. So accountability is a big, big part of making a decision, especially an important decision like forgiving.
And you talk about vulnerability. I mean, prison, out of all places, um, you never show emotions. And in a group like yours, that is something that is being addressed. And so this is going to be a very foreign feeling for so many of the people who attend your classes, to be able to actually bring that up and leave it at the curb.
Well, I'll tell you, being that it is behind the wall, there's a lot of chit chat that goes on in prison. I mean, let's face it, we got, time on our hands when you're behind the wall. And confidentiality is extremely important, because, like you said, some men are opening up for the first time in their lives to this degree, to share their vulnerability to this degree. And there has to be confidentiality in the group. So one of the things that I mention when we start this class is that each person has to acknowledge that what is said in that room, what is done in that room, will remain in that room. And it won't leave the room. There has to be a pledge of confidentiality. And I'll tell you, I'm very grateful that when I do a class, that they don't have correctional officers sitting in the room. They don't have other staff that are sitting in the room observing the class. That there may be cameras, depending on where the class is held. But in terms of other men in that room that are physically present, the confidentiality plays a big part. So every man has to agree that what is said and done in that room remains confidential, because there has to be an emotionally safe place for each person to be able to take ownership emotionally of their authentic selves. And so confidentiality is really, really important. And like you said, it's not easy when you're behind the wall. And so I give people a free pass if they think that there's a challenge in that confidentiality to leave the room. The only people that stay in the room for this class are those that have agreed, that take a pledge, an oath, that make a promise that what happens in that room stays in that room. And if they can't agree to that, they're not in the class. We have to have that boundary in order to have an emotionally safe place.
Now, we were talking about that this week was on the 5 commandments of forgiving. And I think we've touched on a couple.
We have. Yeah, you know what? It's so easy to get off on tangents sometimes, and and take an exit off the highway, so to speak. But you're right. We got and I want to talk a little bit about those commandments. And I'm gonna and this is actually a handout, and I'm gonna just read this verbatim for those who are listening, because there's probably some people listening that have a pen and pencil or a piece of paper and they're writing some stuff down. So I'm just gonna read this verbatim for those who are listening and just want to take some notes. So the first commandment, and again, some of this is repetitive, but it's important to revisit, is that the negative emotions, shame, regret, remorse, guilt, anger, resentment, bitterness, were never meant to be feelings attached to us for the rest of our lives. There is a moment in our lives where we're supposed to let those feelings go. And as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, forgiving is a decision. So if not now, when? The second commandment is holding on to emotional wounds for years or decades takes away a lot of our power to be authentic and true to ourselves. When we have a lot of emotions that are negative emotions that we're living with, our heart's only so big. And when we fill up a lot of our heart with negative stuff, we don't have room to replace that with positive stuff. And there are a lot of positive energies that people bring inmates in to help other inmates. I mean, there is a synergy that goes on in these classes. And if we don't give in to our ego and go to battle with our ego and win that war where we can be authentic in our feelings, then we take away our power to be happy, our power to live with peace and contentment. It is a power. And we deprive ourselves of that power when we hold on to negative wounds. Number 3, I talked about a little bit just a couple of minutes ago, and that is that no one who is emotionally wounded as a child is at fault for anything that happens to them as by an adult. So a lot of people think that they were never good enough in the eyes of their father, because their father put demands on them, that are demands that a man would put on another man, but a man should never put on a child. And so, to get rid of the shame and the remorse, it's very important that we understand that we're not at fault as a 5 or 6 or 7-year-old, for anything that happens to us. We do make mistakes. Children make mistakes. They're learning, but they should be able to learn by love and affection and nurturing, and someone who is compassionate and understanding. And a lot of that was never a part of our upbringing as children. The next commandment is, again, something that I brought up a couple of minutes ago, and that is that the past doesn't define who we are. One of the things, Valerie, in the class that people do if they make the decision to forgive is to allow other inmates in that room to come up to them, to look at them in the eyes, and to be able to share with them what they feel about their knowledge of that other person. That friendship. There's a lot of friendship. There's a lot of synergy. By the way, excuse my voice here, Valerie. It's coffee refreshment time here to clear my throat. So a lot of inmates need that positive feedback from other, participants in the room as to the goodness that they bring to others. That, the wisdom that they bring to the table. One of the prisons I went to, one of the people attending my class said that every morning, before wake up, he takes a proverb and he makes copies of it. Obviously, he's a religious man, and he puts it under the door of every room in his facility, or his building, and so that there's an inspirational quote that this inmate, decides to do every night. Make these little copies and then put them underneath the door. Man, what a gift. And some of the people were getting up there talking about this particular inmate that does this every day. And some of the inmates said, I'm not religious, or, I don't always look at these proverbs that this guy leaves me, but I respect the fact that he cares about others. He's showing compassion in his daily life, and what a gift that is. So, we all have gifts that we offer. We all have gifts that we offer. Learning how to play guitar, being there, in a religious sense to support someone, being there just to guide someone in their hobby of arts and crafts, whatever it is, whatever it is. And then, the last commandment is that we can hold others responsible for anything that we want to, but no one is responsible for our long-term feelings than us. It's on us. So we have to remove ourselves from the victim role in order to become emotionally free. And again, Valerie, and it's so important that I repeat this, we can hold others responsible for just about anything and everything, but at the end of the day, they are not responsible for our feelings. We are responsible for our feelings. And again, you're not letting them off the hook by forgiving. You're letting yourself off the hook.
I think you brought up a really important word, and it stood out to me, and that's acknowledgement. Acknowledgement of what's happened, acknowledgement that you weren't responsible, and acknowledgement that you can make the change and find joy again in life and put this in the past. Not that it goes away, because it's going to pop up and bite you every once in a while. As we know, our brain is this remarkable little machine in there that gives us dreams and weird thoughts sometimes. But by acknowledging what's happened and having others acknowledge your story and be able to relate to you and still be able to talk about it and understand each other is such an important step.
Yeah, to be able to sit in a group of 20 men in a circle and hear other men's wounds, hear other men's vulnerability, hear other men's pain, is not something that commonly occurs behind the wall. And it, in most cases, listening to all that vulnerability becomes a reflection for us that, that I'm not the only one that went through all this crap, growing up, this emotional turmoil, this emotional chaos growing up. I'm not the only one who had a father that cared more about his addictions than he cared about his son or his sons. I'm not the only one that was tormented and physically abused and told to carry on a burden that as a child that I was never meant to carry. And when they hear vulnerability of other men, it makes them understand that that we are not alone in a rough beginning. in our lives. And, that's, that can lead to a path of trying to get acceptance from someone who will love us, who will nurture us. And oftentimes, there's a lurking out there in the form of gangs that take, that look at this as easy prey, and we get sucked into the gang life, or criminal life. And then, we end up paying the consequences by getting busted. So, it's sort of a journey that we don't have by choice, but it's just kind of, I call it living in the jungle and trying to navigate your way out of the jungle. And sometimes you run into bad things in the jungle that suck you in. And that's kind of an analogy, I think, to describe a lot of the history of what led people to getting busted.
Yeah, I just read an article yesterday that says we have the highest rate of incarceration in the world ever right now. And what we've been doing isn't working. So I'm hoping that more programs like what you're doing, and I had this thought come to me, like the light bulbs went off, that I think the staff can use this as much as the residents.
Hey, let me tell you, the staff could use it. For sure, the staff can use this. You know what? Let me tell you that, there's this isn't just on the inside of prison, all right? I talked about, that freedom, true freedom comes from the inside. There's a lot of men out there who are not in prison, but they're still living in prison, which is an emotional prison. A prison isn't just physical confinement. A prison is an emotional confinement as well. And that's what, is important for people to understand. And yeah, the people that show up to work in a prison, they've got their issues, and I'm sure that they chatter among themselves, about their home life and their issues and their upbringing. They come, a lot of these people come from the same, backgrounds of not having a father who was really there to support them. And I was, uh, one of those people to some degree growing up. I certainly was a victim by my own father of some very strict discipline that broke the law, for sure.
Thank God that some of those things have changed since, spanking has pretty much gone by the wayside at this point. And as you know, a lot of spankings that many of us got as children were much more than just a spanking. It was not a little tap on the butt.
Oh no, 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 no. For men, it's the belt, and the belt is wishful thinking for some of the men that have talked about their pain growing up, fathers who just threw them against the wall and hit them, and oh man, I mean, just abuse to the degree that is really unimaginable. But um, pain causes other pain. Men who are not happy themselves in their lives, who are suffering, it's easy to try to get rid of that pain by inflicting pain on others. And it never works, but it's unfortunately a part of life that a lot of us endured as children.
When we discussed too last time that a lot of time it's generational, and that's the thing too, I think, about programs like what you're doing. It gives us a better understanding of where our parents came from. And not that it makes it easier, but it you can see the whole picture, that you see the grandfather and the father and the son, and then it just keeps continuing. And it happens with many areas in life, with addictions and abuse and poverty, and the list goes on and on and on.
Right.
But that's where we're here to try to make those changes. And I'm so thankful that we have an opportunity, especially a platform like what we have right now, that our voices are going into the prisons and we're on the outside trying to do something to help those that are on the inside. So when they come home, or even if they don't come home, those that are never coming home, the forgiveness will allow you to still have a life worth living when you get up in the morning. So,
And
programs like this are important.
and in our relationship with others through visitation and now with the tablets, being able to video your loved ones and your friends and stay in touch with people. When you become emotionally free, that energy is going to be felt in our relationship with others. And when we are emotionally free from the past, that is going to help others become emotionally free from the past. We still have a relationship, even if we're on the inside. We still can have a relationship with others. And, that's one of the positive things that has happened in the prison system, at least in this part of the country where I'm at, and that is the use of tablets and being able to communicate. Because it gives us the ability to continue to have a form of relationship with someone. And, that cycle can be broken in terms of the negative upbringing that many of us have had through generational chaos. And we become emotionally free, it affects our relationship with our spouses and our children and our relatives and our friends. And we have the ability, even though we're on the inside, to break that cycle. And that is a gift that you can give to another person. When you're emotionally free, it's easier for them to become emotionally free.
And I once heard somebody say, if it's going to be, it has to start with me.
Amen. Amen on that.
I think that might be a pretty good place for us to start wrapping things up. I'm curious as to what our next talk is going to be about.
I'll tell you, our next talk, Valerie, I think would be a really good thing to talk about would be when is the moment in our lives that we know is the right time to let it go, to let the past go. There is a defining moment. And the other thing I'd like to speak about next time is the need to forgive ourselves. Forgiving comes in two layers. One is forgiving others, and one is forgiving ourselves. And, the first person that we really need to forgive is ourselves, to get rid of the remorse and the shame and the guilt and all that other stuff. And so we can definitely tackle that head on our next podcast. I'd love to. I think it would be a great topic.
All right, great. Let's wrap things up. I want to remind everyone we've been talking with Rob Corbin, and we are discussing leaving the emotional cage, which I think is a great topic. We'll be back again with segment number 3. Again, I'd like to thank you for joining us on the Prison Pod.
Thank you, Valerie.
You have been listening to The Prison Pod, a podcast not just for those in prison but for anyone who has been affected by incarceration. Ms. Valerie would love for you to write to her with your questions, comments, and show ideas. The address is Prison Pod, Post Office Box 294, Orono, Maine. 04473. Remember, reading opens doors, so pick up that book.